to be avoided are flattery.
All right, let's begin with our prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Tired martyrs. In the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so have your handout on your desk with your notebook. And what we'll be doing is we'll be going through, page by page together, talk about there's different concepts that you'll need to understand in order to get the full meaning of what's going on in this dialogue. So, on page number 1, you've noticed that I've highlighted for you a portion of the text where Plato is talking about quid and quale. So I want to first begin by talking about these. So does anyone know what quid means in Latin?
Which? What?
What? It means what? So when they're talking about the quiddity of a thing, they're referring to its whatness.
Whatness?
Yeah, or another term that might be more familiar to is essence. The thing as it exists in itself. So the second Latin term that's used is quale. The quale is referring to the thing's quality. All right, so in the context of virtue, they're talking about, whether virtue is like something noble or it's something good. And then Socrates sits pause in the conversation and says, whoa, you're asking me what I think about its quality, and we haven't even established what the essence is. All right, we haven't even defined what this thing is, so how can we know whether it's good or bad, noble or ignoble, unless we actually know what the thing is itself? All right, and so the point to be learned here from this part of the dialogue is that quale comes from quiddity. All right, because the thing's qualities derive from its essence, you first need to understand what the essence is itself in order to then understand whether or not you can start attributing positive or negative qualities to it. So on page 2, they begin, again, taking up the inquiry regarding virtue. And I want to give you guys a little Greek terminology here so you can understand maybe a little bit better what's going on in the text. So, erete is the Greek word that we translate as virtue. However, another translation for erete that's just as good is excellence. So whenever you read the word virtue in these Greek dialogues, it can be helpful as a mental exercise while going through the text to just swap it out with the word excellence or excellent. And then you can kind of get a little bit more of a grasp about why there's so much mystery about this topic of virtue. Because what they're really discussing is what is an excellent human. Okay, the virtuous person is going to be the human who is the excellent one. All right, so they're kind of talking about the ideals for humanity, how to live excellently is the same thing as asking how does one go about living virtuously. So in page 2, Plato establishes that things like patience is a virtue. All right, so when we say patience is a virtue, you're normally used to hearing your mom say that to you, and then it's kind of a nagging way of hey, here's this guide for you to behave. But really, when you think about it in the Greek sense, when we say patience is a virtue, it's not just a way your mom's trying to get you to behave, but it's really to live an excellent human life, you're going to incorporate patience into your life. If you don't allow patience to be incorporated into how you live, well then there's going to be things that come up in your life, and your life won't be as excellent as it could be because you will lack the self-control to deal with certain problems that come up and other frustrations. So in page 2, Meno gives the definition of virtue. However, there's a problem with it. What's the first attempt at definition Meno gives on page 2? Someone locate the text and read it, please. Michael?
He should know how to administer the state and administration to benefit his friends and harm his enemies.
Okay, and then he keeps going, right, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Keep going with it.
And he must also be careful not to suffer harm himself. A woman's virtue, if you wish to know about that, may also be easily described. Her duty is to order her house and keep what is indoors and obey her husband. Every age, every condition of life, young, old, male or female, bound or free, has a different virtue. There are virtuous numberless, and no lack of definition for them. For virtue is relative to the actions and ages of each of us in what we do, and some may be said of vice.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. So what's the problem with Meno's attempted definition of virtue here at this point? Isaiah?
He's basically just saying that there are a lot of them. He's not actually giving a definition.
Yeah, he's not giving you a definition. He's just saying that there's many types. Okay? So imagine you ask for a definition about insects. Okay? And then the guy responding to you with the definition of insects is going to say, well, there's the ants. And then there's the beetles. And then there's the bees. But don't get confused about the spiders, because they're technically not insects. All right, so that's not an actual definition of insect, but he's just giving you this list of all these different kinds. All right, and so that's what Socrates points out to him, and that's why he brings up the definition of the bees, or the example of the bees, rather. All right, what he wants to get is, what do all the bees have in common? All right, he gave me an example, a list of all these different virtues, but if you're going to give me the definition should explain what is it all these virtues have in common. All Meno did was he kind of explained differences amongst the virtues. All right, so throughout pages 1 through 5, we're trying to work out this definition. And page 5, Plato begins to talk about, in order to get a definition, you need the simile and multis. Simile and multis. Latin scholars, what does that mean?
The similarity in the many.
Yeah, all right. Very good. The similarity in the many, or you can also translate the similarity in the multitude. Or to phrase it in a very Platonic way, the one by which the many are one. Once you can establish the one by which the many are one, or you establish the similarity that the multitude has, what all the vast multitude shares in common, then you have your definition. So, page 4, Meno starts to say, okay, Socrates, I think I'm starting to get what you're saying. So, how about this as a definition? Virtue is the power to govern mankind. Virtue for a human is to govern mankind. To live an excellent human life is to govern mankind. What's the problem with this definition? Michael?
People who aren't really living like excellence and sometimes govern people like a tyrant.
Okay, that's a really good point, but that's actually not the avenue that the dialogue goes down. The point that they make with that is that, well, Meno, would you say that there are virtuous slaves? Oh, yes, I have virtuous slaves. All right, do you have, virtuous, like, housewives? Yeah, all right. They're not governing mankind, right? They're not seeking out to be tyrants, what have you. And so the definition falls short because it actually doesn't apply to human life. It's too specific. Again, it's just another example. So once we get to page 6, the dialogue takes a turn and they start talking about just the problems of finding a definition in general. All right, and so the example is Socrates provides Meno with the definition of figure. Does anyone remember that definition of figure that's super short? There's the definition of figure that Socrates gives them. It's what follows color. Once the color stops, well, then you can pretty much figure out your figure there. All figures will have a color. And Meno says that is kind of silly for Meno. He doesn't like it because it's not something he's used to talking about. And one of the problems he brings up is like, well, Socrates, what if I don't know what color is? This definition is no help to me. All right, giving this definition to a blind person, for example, isn't going to be particularly useful to them, or a colorblind person. So I'll present you with another example of this. Let's take a look at the Jurassic period. The definition of the Jurassic period is the time period of 106 Maya through 148 Maya, which borders the Triassic and Cretaceous periods.
I'm here looking at my notes later today and wondering why I was doing earth science in my philosophy section of my notebook.
Yeah. Within the Mesozoic era. Okay, so everyone's got that definition of the Jurassic period? Yeah, the Jurassic period inside and out now. You know it's quiddity. All right, so what are some of the things that you would need to know first before you could actually understand the definition given?
Time.
Time?
Time.
Is the word time in there?
Time period.
Yeah, time period. Okay, so you know what time is, all right, yeah. That's not usually where I go with this, but yes, you can make arguments about time. Louisa?
You have to know what the end of the period exact.
Okay, what's a Triassic and a Cretaceous period? What is an era? What does Mesozoic mean? Does anyone know what Maya means?
Million years ago.
Millions of years ago, okay, that usually trips people up. All right, so all this does is this illustrates that, like, coming to a definition can be really hard, and even if you do come to it, you could be talking about things that you really don't understand. Like Isaiah likes to throw the curveball about time. Do you even understand what time is? Probably not, unless you guys have studied relativity. And then again, relativity is just a theory, and it could be wrong as well. So who on earth knows what time actually is? All right, so on page 7, the dialogue continues, and then they start talking about these things called effluencies. I'm going to explain to you guys what these are, so you have a little bit more of a sense about the Greek culture and the prevalent theories at the time. All right, so with the effluencies, the ancient Greeks believed that bodies were constantly shooting out atoms. Okay? As you're walking around, you are like emitting these in all directions in 360-degree angles, right? These different atoms. And some atoms are shaped like this. Not really, I don't think actually, I mean, these aren't the actual shapes they thought they were, but these are just to kind of illustrate. Some were shaped like this. Some like this. Okay? And the atoms that were shaped like this fit into these tiny little inserts in your nose. All right? And the atoms that shot into your nose is how you smelled. Then the atoms that shot and they had a little fitting in your eye is how you saw things. And then the diamonds would be, okay, let's say it's the ears, right? That's how you hear things, is that these atoms are just kind of shooting out constantly.
That's not entirely wrong.
Yeah, I guess so.
At least they were smart enough to come up with some idea.
I mean, when you do smell, that is particles going into your nose. They just don't have a specific shape.
Yeah, and there are particular receptors in your nose to pick up scents, right? Yeah. But I mean, like, you know, obviously sound waves are different than
And so is the eyes one. That's
the lights
also pretty
different.
complicated.
Yeah. All right, so notice Socrates does not admit of their existence. Okay. He actually doesn't agree with this theory. Plato does. But he uses it in the dialogue as an example of like, okay, well, how about I just start talking about something that you agree with? And then you start agreeing with my definitions. All right, to just kind of make a point that Meno is just really into rhetoric. And because these words match up, talking about effluence, he's like, okay, yeah, this is the science I know. I'll listen to you now, Socrates. He showed that Meno's not actually being a very good participant in this dialogue, just because when Socrates is bringing up definitions that are unfamiliar to him, he then begins to, question everything. But when he brings up the effluencies, he doesn't question it all and says, oh yeah, that sounds good to me. All right, so on pages 8 through 9, Meno proposes another definition of virtue. This is still Meno, so we're not getting right at the heart of it. Meno tries to define virtue as the desire to do good, desiring the good. Got what I'm saying? And having the power to obtain it. So the excellent human life is desiring what's good and then actually being able to go and get it. It's often things like power, money, health. All right, but yet again, Socrates has an issue with this definition. What's wrong with it? On page 8, where he points out the problem. Michael?
There are some who desire evil.
No, that's not the problem. It's not the problem. In fact, it's the opposite of what you said, really. Socrates says, look, dude, this is no good because guess what? All men desire the good. And so this is kind of unnecessary because all men desire good. And then Meno replies, well, what do you mean? There are men who desire evil. And Socrates says, no men desire evil. And so let's read through the dialogue. We're going to go through this proof that all men desire the good. It's a really important proof that I want you guys to know, memorize, learn from. So going to page 8. Louisa, can you read from the top?
Meno. Well then, Socrates, virtue, as I take it, is when he who desires the honorable is able to provide it for himself. So the poet says, and I say too, virtue is the desire of things honorable and the power of his kingdom. Socrates. And does he who desire the honorable also desire the good? Meno. Certainly. Socrates. Then there are some who desire the evil and others who desire the good. Not all men, my dear sir, desire good. Meno. I think not. Socrates. There are some who desire evil. Meno. Yes. Socrates. You mean that they think evils which they desire to be good, but do you know that they are evil in desire? Meno. Both, I think. Socrates. And do you really imagine, Meno, that a man who knows evil to be evils, desire them is not smoking? Meno. Certainly I do. Socrates. And desire is of possessing. Yes, of possessing. Socrates. And does he think evils which do harm to him to possess them, or does he know that they do harm?
Keep going, but I'm just skip that.
There are some who think that evils will do them harm, do them good, and others who know that they will do them harm. In your opinion, do those who think that they would do them good know that they are evils? Certainly not. Is it not obvious that those who are ignorant of their nature do not desire them, but they desire what they suppose to be goods, although they are really evils? And if they are mistaken and suppose evils to be goods, they really desire goods. Yes, in that case. Well, do those who, as you say, desire evil, think that evils are hurtful, the possessor of them know that they will be hurt by them? They must know it. Must they not suppose that those who are hurt are miserable portions of hurt which is complete to the contrary? How can it be otherwise? But are there miserable ill-fated? Yes. Does anyone desire to be miserable and ill-fated? I should not say so.
In order to possess some good. All right, that is universally the case. Think of any evil action. And now think, what's the good that's actually trying to be achieved by doing that evil action? So can you guys think of any examples where someone might do something bad, but it's actually them trying to achieve some good that they perceive?
Hitler thinks that the Aryan race is best as a good, so he tries to get rid of everyone else, which is bad.
Okay, yeah, so he strives after the evil of the Holocaust, all right? He goes after the evil of, like, starting a war. But the perceived good, all right, is the dominion of his race, all right? That's the good thing that he desires. Or you could say the success of his race, all right? It's good to want to see a race be successful, right? And so that's the good he's shooting for, and then he's actually doing it, though, by desiring some kind of evil, though. But it's not the actual evil thing he's desiring, but for this, or if he does desire the evil, it's for the sake of some other good. Any other examples? Spencer?
Communism.
Okay, explain. What's the evil that's being desired? Just communism itself? A godless society? Why do they? What's the good behind that they're actually striving for?
Well,
Having economic equality across the board, and they get it. Just economic equality and poverty, right?
Some people are just more equal than others.
Yes, if you work in the government, then you're a little bit more equal than the other people who don't. So men seek evil in order to possess some good, and if they're doing that, it's because they're ignorant of the true nature of the evil. Now, if this isn't the case, then the men are seeking what they know will hurt them, and not just something good. All right, if men actually desired evil for its own sake, they would be intentionally seeking evil men seek evil and know they will be hurt by it. All right, now, to actually go out and seek an evil for the sake of inflicting harm upon yourself, all right, is Plato's definition of misery. All right, to be miserable is to have an ill fate. Because no one wants an ill fate across the board, you might ask someone like, well, do you want to have this evil? And they'll say yes. But then if you ask someone, do you want to have ill fate for the rest of your life and end in misery, they're going to say, no. All right? Because this is an ill fate and no one actually desires it, then no one really desires evil. So this brings up a very good distinction, and that is the apparent good versus the real good. In many instances, all men will always choose the apparent good. Always. You will always choose an apparent good. So for Hitler, the apparent good that he was pursuing was the supremacy of his race, right? That appeared to him as a good. So we call it the apparent good. Even people who are like crocodile addicts, right? Crocodile is a Ukrainian drug. It's like made from ground coffee beans and gasoline. They inject it into their skin, and it's actually like it's more pleasurable and more addicting than heroin. However, your injection sites start to decay and rot. So you like walk around with like open flesh wounds and you can like see their muscles and bones. That's really disgusting. All right. So people who make those choices, they're seeking the apparent good. And what's the apparent good that they're going for? Pleasure, all right? An escape from reality is the apparent good. But that is not always the same thing as the real good. All right, in order to seek out the real good, you have to have knowledge of the real good. All right, now you can also have an opinion and come across it by luck, all right? Or by providence, maybe. All right, so the real good can be known, and it requires knowledge in order to pursue it. And of course, so continuing with like our Platonic way of looking at the world, well, if you're going to seek the real good, it's going to be something that excludes evil entirely, all right? And so for Plato, when you go out and you're seeking good, you're trying to find that which is goodness itself. All right, you want to find the essence of good and then pursue that. And if it's going to be the essence, it's going to be good through and through. There won't be any admixtures of evil going on in there. Now, bear in mind, all right, Plato is a pagan philosopher, but he's actually getting really, really close to the Christian articulation of like how God is the end of our lives, right? So God is what men actually desire because by definition God is good. Because God's infinite goodness, that means he also excludes any kind of notion of being admixed with evil whatsoever. And so Plato will also conclude, we'll read it a little bit later on, but he's going to conclude that the real good is the end that people are always pursuing. All right, so continuing through the dialogue, pages 9 through 10, Meno says, all right, I get what you're saying about this, all men desire good, and we'll pick up at this point next class.